Is there a, oh, there we go. Thanks, Jim.
All right. Well, as Stephanie said, I'm Trevor Baker. I am a Vice President of Support, Education, and Client Strategy at Performance Scoring, a Dallas-based company. I was contacted this morning to fill in as a moderator on Jen Thornton's Globinar here, our DFW meetup. I have met personally with Jen a few times in the past. I'm very familiar with her work and what she does. So I'm proud to introduce her today. I know all of you who've joined, you're going to be in for a great session today. Jen, I'm not going to spill the beans too much on what you do outside of 304 coaching and your executive coaching, because I don't know how much you want to get into that. But if you do get into the behavioral assessment stuff that you do, I will definitely pipe up and give that some backing, because if you guys have never heard of what she does on that side of things, it's pretty amazing as far as behavioral assessment goes. I came from education, public education for 14 years, been in the private sector for 4 now. So I've seen a lot of assessments. Jen's onto something. So that's all I'll say about that. As far as Jen goes, as I said before, she is the founder of 304 Coaching. She helps high-performing leaders and organizations build resilient teams and drive success. She's got a background in leading global teams, but this is the unique thing, a deep understanding of neuroscience-informed leadership. I was a biology major, chemistry person, taught biology, and this to me is some amazing stuff that Jen does. So without further ado, and me talking anymore, because I am a show enough introvert that can be an extrovert for about 20 minutes. I'm going to send this thing right over to Jen and let her get started.
Well, Trevor, thank you for that introduction. And I know those were a lot of words for you, so I appreciate it. All right, well, we're going to jump in. But before we jump in, I want to make sure if you jumped in the chat or onto the call most recently, you might not see that there is a one-page download that you can use during our session today. If you're not able to see that from Jem, she may need to drop that link again, because once you jump on, you can't see the chat previous. So looks like she just dropped it again. It's just a one-page download that's going to have some of the things we're going to talk about today around talent strategy, so that you can look at your own organization and kind of start to think where you are in the pieces that we're talking about, and maybe make a few notes. All right, so I'm going to jump in and we're going to get started. I want to thank everyone for spending their time with us today. The world is busy, and so for you to make time for your own learning, your own development, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you trusting me with this valuable time. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is talent strategy. And at 304 Coaching, you know, we started actually as an executive coaching business. We did also have OAD, which is the talent survey assessment that Trevor was speaking about. And that's what we were going to do. And that was almost 8 years ago, which is really crazy. And then what happened is, because of my background, I would have an executive who I used to talk to call and go, hey, could you do this? And could you do that? And this person needs this. All of a sudden I was like, hey, wait a minute, we're actually a talent strategy agency now. And so that's what I focus on, is I help people think about their talent strategy for their organization. And we'll talk a little bit about why I'm passionate about it, and why I hope you're passionate about it, and what all goes into a talent strategy. And so Trevor's already told you all those things about me. So there you go. So it's interesting, you know, in my life, I've worked all over the U.S. And internationally for a large organization, but I specialized in our new brands, and I specialized in our new country setup. So I was basically always on a startup team. That was my role. It's what I loved. And some of our startups were crazy awesome, and some of our startups were not, and they failed miserably. And that's the great thing about taking calculated risks. Some work, some don't. And I started really thinking about why that is. And one of the things that I knew in my gut, because we had all the financial resources, all the brand recognition, we had everything that made sense on paper, but sometimes it just didn't work. And what I realized is that when it worked, there was a key difference, and that was the talent that was on the project or the talent that's in the organization. So if you think about your company today, think about the talent in your company, think about where you're taking your business, and think about how you got to where you are. And so most fast-growing businesses or divisions of a company that are fast-growing, what happens is the talent that's on that project or the talent that's in that fast-growing organization, their skill set is greater than what is actually needed to run the business. So they're pulling the business up with them, right? They're climbing that cliff and they're climbing it well, and it feels good and everything's excited. They're really pulling that business up that mountain, and they're watching that revenue grow and grow. And that continues, and it is awesome, and we're happy and we're feeling good about life. And then the company's like, wow, we're onto something. This company's doing great. The startup's doing great. We might have investors now. We might, be expanding. What happens is, I would say probably 99% of the organizations out there, they do things like they worry about our delivery, our services, cost of goods sold. They worry about everything, but they very rarely think about the talent and how to invest in the talent. And then what happens is the business continues to grow. But if your talent around it that is bringing that with is not also growing, the business eventually outpaces the company. And so instead of having talent group whose skill sets are more than what the business needs, now you're in a situation where the business needs more than what your talent can give it. And that is never a good place to be. I call it the talent cliff. And so our little talent people here are at the top of the cliff, and they're trying to figure out where to go next. The business is kind of overwhelming them. They start to be reactive, fear-based leadership. That brain starts to kick in, and that fear. And then what happens when we start doing that? Our best talent starts to leave. They don't want to lead in an environment where there's a lot of fear. They start to leave us. And then when our best talent leaves, things start to get rocky. Things start to go off that side of that cliff. And at the end, what goes off of it after all of our good talent is gone, or we have worn down in fear all of our good talent, our business goes right behind it, and everything's kind of gone off that cliff. And hopefully, the worst thing that happens is we plateau, and in some cases, even worse. So has anyone ever felt this or watched a team go off that talent cliff? They were just amazing and rolling, or been on that team, and all of a sudden the business just took off and the team wasn't able to stay on it. Anyone have that situation? You can drop it in the chat. I need to open the chat up too, so I can see if you drop anything in there.
Well, Jen, I can give a response from the education world. I mean, it is somewhat like a business, but I was a part of a pretty fast growing school system and north of Dallas in Argyle. And we began to grow. When I was a teacher, we had 120 kids in every grade level. When I left, it was pushing 400. So fast growth. We were getting a lot of staff in after being a teeny tiny school. And for a moment there, we were vibing. Everybody was working toward that same goal. But once we got to that growth point of all these people, I saw exactly what you just described. People just getting burnt out with the same routine, and they're just like, what, all these other people are coming in. I don't have a voice anymore. And it got rocky.
Yeah, it does. And that happens in the private sector, the public sector. It happens in nonprofits. It happens all the time. And when I think about, the baseline, how do we prevent this? When I think of really, really strong CEOs, C-suite groups, they think of one hand as their money and one hand as their people. Because without money and people, your company is going nowhere fast. And I would tell you probably 90% of the companies, if you say to them, do you have a business plan? Is there a financial plan in that business plan? Is there, a way to scale your product? They're going to be like, yes, yes, yes. And if you say, well, what's your talent plan? Who's going to actually deliver everything that's in your business plan? Do you have a plan for that? Probably 1% will say yes. And that's where things fall apart. And that's where I'm so passionate, because if your talent plan is as robust as your financial plan, you're going to have your money and talent together, and then the business is just going to happen. And so those are those big leaders who really understand the fact that one hand is talent and one hand is money, and you got to have both working for you to make it happen. All right, so let's think about that. So to do that, you have to have a talent strategy. And this is not your traditional HR stuff. Don't even think about that. That has nothing to do with this side of the business. This is around making sure that we have, whoops, my screen kind of freaked out there. Sorry about that. This is about thinking about that talent strategy, and it's a way to really support the business strategy. It is based on your business strategy, and it really focuses on those long-term needs to keep that consistent development of the talent so that the team skill set always stays ahead of what your business needs are. And that looks like in a couple of different ways. When you think about, visualization of that, most companies, hopefully at the very least, their skill set and their business needs are at least equal, because that's, a good situation. And then those continue to grow, but your business needs are always evolving, especially in today's world. Every day is a new day. We don't necessarily know what's happening with our business. We have to have really mentally resilient leaders. And with that business and needs and goals always changing, if we're not also developing and thinking about that talent strategy, we start to fill that gap. And that's where fear leads in. Now, with a strong talent strategy, our goal is to always keep the talents above the need of the business. Always keep that in mind. It's one of the most simple ways to think about it. So your talent's got to be stronger than what the business actually needs. And so you start to think, well, what are the structures of a talent strategy? There's a lot that goes into it, and I'm going to go through some of those today, but there's always a place to start. Most businesses, if they don't have a talent strategy, it'd be really hard to jump in and do all of this at once, but we'll help you think about where to start today. So a full, robust talent strategy, the culture is always the foundation. This is not a culture on a piece of paper. This is truly the ecosystem of how the company functions. And culture is an ecosystem. We're going to get into that a little bit more, but we have to have a really healthy ecosystem. With a healthy ecosystem, we have to start with org design. And most companies, even if you're a small 10-person company, you've got to still start with org design. Even, 10-person, 50,000 people in a company, without understanding what work needs to be done, how to organize that work, how that work interacts with each other, we're just doing a whole lot of stuff. We're all just coming to work and hoping for the best. But org design is one of the most important things you can do after culture. And then you have to have your leaders aligned, and you have to continuously develop your leaders. I get calls all the time. People want to work on middle management. And I'm like, that's fantastic. That's amazing. Let's talk about your executives. You can throw so much resources at your new leaders, at your up and coming leaders, at your middle manager leaders. But if you don't have executives that are incredibly aligned and very resilient and strong in how they think and are leading from a creative mindset, what's going to happen, all those resources that you put in kind of the bottom of that funnel, you just don't get your bang for the buck. You have strong executives, all that starts to trickle down. And then you have to think about employer branding. Who are you attracting and why are you attracting them? Hey, now you've attracted them. Let's start training and developing. Let's have a really clear training and development strategy. You have to hold people accountable. Performance is part of what we get paid for. What we're doing is it's exchange. I show up, I perform the job we've agreed to. In exchange, you pay me. We have to make sure that exchange is always there. And then we want to be able to succession plan and grow that business. And so those are the pieces. Now, inside those pieces, there's a lot of, 1.2s and, 2.22. But from a high level, that's what we want to look at. And I know that's a lot. So I always tell people, where do you want to start? If you have a very solid ecosystem and a culture that works, it's highly functional, you have strong org design and your team's aligned, you can do more than most companies can. These three things are the foundation of a really strong organization. So let's start with culture. So culture obviously is the foundation that creates an ecosystem, and it's really how people do their work. And you're probably thinking, why in the world is there a little goldfish in a little bag on this screen? Well, when I think of hiring someone new, you know how when you get a new fish and it comes in this little bag, and then you hopefully have a very happy ecosystem, your tank, its culture at home. And so you just don't take that goldfish and throw it in, because then it will really struggle. You take that goldfish, you let it float in its water, you let it get used to that healthy ecosystem, and then you let it loose. And that's what culture is. Culture allows you to bring anyone in, and that culture is so strong and so healthy that those people adapt to it. They don't change it, they adapt to it. And that's a really important piece of thinking about culture. If your culture is really strong, people change when they get into it. They don't necessarily disrupt the actual pattern of the ecosystem. And it matters. I do a ton of work around culture design, implementation of culture. It is not a one workshop activity. Every culture project I do, I require companies to have their executive leadership team work with me for 1 year, because it takes a year for executives to start really understanding and making this ecosystem healthy and consistent. And it matters for countless reasons, but it really provides stability. When you're in a healthy ecosystem and healthy culture, when you wake up that day, your brain knows what to expect. It can predict what's going to happen. Therefore, it's not wasting energy on what in the world's going to be bad and happen to me. It's spending its energy thinking about how am I going to deliver on the results I've committed to. And so it just allows you to have more of a consistent and smooth, more resilient. When problems happen, people know the lens in which to look through. There are so many countless reasons why culture really matters. Has anyone ever worked in an environment where culture was king? And it was like just dropping someone into an ecosystem and they learned how to swim in it? Anyone have that opportunity? You can come off mute, or Stephanie says yes. Oh, Stephanie must be on her phone. I know she was moving from one to another because we're all busy. Yeah. So when you think about, John, when you think about that healthy ecosystem, what made it enjoyable for you?
Well, I think so. One of my clients, we helped build out a very mature process environment so that it was very easy for someone from another division to come in, and they knew exactly what they needed to do, who they reported to, and what their deliverables were. So it made things much, much easier than just walking into an ad hoc environment, right? Where people try to figure out what they need to do.
Yeah. And we do it to people all the time. And then we are surprised when they're not successful. When I have someone call me and say, I've got this work, I've got this, I've got these problems, I always say, what behaviors as a leader of yours have created this problem? And they're like, oh, me? I haven't done anything. I'm like, oh no. We all participated in this. We all have something we own in it. And that's it. And John set me up perfectly to start talking about org design. And that's it. Org design, a lot of that is process mapping actual work, starting to think of how do we get this work done? And that is why org's so important. I think a lot of people think org is just a PowerPoint with a bunch of boxes of who reports to who. Org is actually having really strong clarity on what work needs to be done, who's going to do that work, and how does that work intersect. It's amazing when I do org and I start talking to people. I'll have 3 different departments tell me that all 3 of them are doing something, the other one doesn't even know they're doing it. And then they're like, we're so tired and overwhelmed and overworked. So I'm like, well, we could start with only one person doing the whole thing and not having 3 departments do the same work. We also, when we do this, one of the things that's very interesting, and you got to watch in your own business, is making sure you don't have what I call as vanity work. And vanity work is that work we've always done that makes us feel good, but has very little, if any, business impact. But we're happy to do it. Vanity work also includes that one person who doesn't want to learn the new system or learn how to read the new report. And so everyone's doing one thing, and then one person has to spend a half a day reconfiguring that to make one executive happy. That's vanity work. It's for their own egos because they don't want to learn something new, right? They don't want to make it hard on themselves. And so org design is really around figuring out what is the high impact work, what's A priority work, B priority work, C priority work, how's that work going to interact with each other? And then who do we hire to actually get that done? And what does all that look like? And so it's not, just a bunch of boxes on a PowerPoint screen. And so when you think about why it matters, one of the things that I think happens so much, and when I think about companies who fail, payroll is one of those expenses we can control. And when we don't have a good culture, so we're not, working in a high function state or high function state, we don't have good org, what we're doing is we're throwing payroll at our problems all day long. Someone's going to come into work and they're in tears and they're overwhelmed and and they need help. And so we just go hire them help because we don't stop and think about why they're overwhelmed. Is it actually the work? And so really strong org allows you to cut back on unnecessary hiring and expense. And again, it provides clarity. It provides these relationships where people are able to do the work together in cross-functional situations because there's so much clarity around the work that needs to be done. And because you have a strong culture, there is this sense of how we do it, because how we do something is as important as what we do. And these two things, when you think about talent strategy, gives you the how and the what, and then you start to build on it from there. If anyone ever has any questions or comments, this is a free-flowing conversation, so just jump in. All right, and then we've got to get these executives all marching together. One of my favorite sayings is, as executives, we will not always agree, but we will always align. And we will all have a consistent front. That is easier said than done. But high performance teams always have a plan to align and to grow as individuals so they can grow as a team. When you look at really high functioning C-suite, ELT, whatever term you want to use for the people who are making the biggest decisions at the top of the pyramid, they're going away once a quarter. They are working with executive coaches to keep their head clear, to keep their head in a place where they're they're resilient, they're handling things, and they are working as a group to be better. And when you have that executive alignment, you'll stop throwing payroll at your problems. When your executives are highly aligned, then depending on how big your company is, your directors are aligned, your managers are aligned, your individual contributors are aligned. But when the executives all have different agendas, good luck with the rest of it. It's not happening. And you certainly can't have a strong culture because there's multiple cultures. You only have a strong culture when all of your executives are aligned and focus. And it matters for so many reasons. But again, it starts to build trust. We have to make as executives really tough decisions that have impact. Decisions, it's not sometimes some of these executives, if you're working in a $4 billion organization, even a $50 million organization, your decisions can be $1 million plus decisions. That takes some stuff in your gut, right? It takes something to really get out there and do that. But it's really a productive way to make sure that we're consistent in our decisions. We're looking at things in different ways and making sure that happens. So Stephanie threw out a question. How do you get people aligned if the organization is not aligned? Oh gosh, that's a whole nother hour we could talk about. But at the end of the day, to have a high functioning organization, the leaders at the very top have to buy into executive alignment work as an individual and as a group. And that is how it happens. There's in fact, I talk to them every Tuesday. There's a team I've worked with for 5 years. I don't even know if I could do the math on how many percentages they've increased over the years. When I started working with them, they were at 4 million 5 years ago, and today we're at 100 million. And with contracts we're signing, in 3 years, they'll be at $500 million. And so in 8 years, they'll go from 4 to 500 million. They have an alignment call every single Tuesday for the last 5 years. We talk about what's going on. We talk about the big decisions. We talk about how we feel about it. And all of them work individually. But every single Tuesday, that ELT has a call just to work with their executive coach to align. There's no way they could have grown that business if they were not aligned. There's no way. Absolutely not. And it allows them to have conversations with some safety, with someone facilitating that, or someone saying, hey, I hear you say that, but 3 weeks ago, you also said this. Which is it? And having someone challenge that. So, Michael, that's impressive. They are impressive. They're amazing. They're just fantastic. They're so much fun to work with because, man, they're like in the gut, like every day is a Super Bowl in the way they work. And so that's where you start. Again, if your organization has a strong culture, strong org, and your executives are aligned, you're doing better than, I would say, probably 80% of the businesses out there. So that's the place to start. Let's see, just watching the chat. And then you start to think about what's next. These next things are important, but they're only important if you can get those first 3 things going. And so then you have employer branding. And what employer branding is, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's really an external voice about who your company is and how you talk to potential team members, employees, how you start to talk with them. And if you have a strategy around employer branding, you're putting out information that the candidates who will fit your culture will resonate with. It'll also turn off those who won't resonate with your culture. And so then you're starting to teach people how to work in your ecosystem before you even hire them. And that's incredible work. When I watch fast growing companies do employer branding and we work on the project, and when they activate this work, they're always like, oh my gosh, like we're just like, there's people waiting to come work for us. And I'm like, well, you have a strong culture, you have executive alignment, and you've told the story. So those who want to be involved in your story are starting to apply and want to be in your story. And it's an interesting way to start to look at it. You know, in the old way, everyone's just like, just go hire someone, go find someone who can do the job. In today's world that's very nuanced, you need people that not only can do the work, but do it in the way in which fits into your ecosystem to keep you healthy. And it's really a competitive advantage. What's interesting is typically your customers start to see that employer branding too, and they start to say, wow, I'm so glad I do business with this company because their employer branding speaks to me. They're probably not going to call it employer branding. They're going to just probably see it as, wow, like I love the way they talk about this on LinkedIn, or I love the way they've shared that value. I'm glad we do business with them. And so though the main point of employer branding is the target of whoever you're going to hire next, your customers are the byproduct of that, and they start to see it too. Has anyone ever done an employer branding project or worked with a company that was focused on employer branding? It's something that's only been going on for the last, probably, I would say, few years. It's not as, it's not kind of rooted in talent strategy like some of the other pieces are, but it's a lot of fun. And then obviously we want to train and develop. We've got to keep everyone's skill set ahead of where it is. And we have to invest in our team members through development programs. I will tell you, do not do one workshop and be done. Don't waste your resources. Send someone to a free webinar. To really develop your team, you have to work with someone who first thinks about your ecosystem, thinks about the expectations of the company, understands how the company interacts, and then creates a program, a long-term program, at least 6 months, if not a year, where you put people in that program so everyone is starting to learn together. Too many times I talk to a company and they're like, well, we invested all this money in this program. And I'm like, well, how did they adapt that program to how you work? Well, they refused to adapt it. Okay, so you taught your ecosystem something that didn't really fit. And so having a partner that thinks about your company and adjusts whatever they do, whatever their training is, to fit your ecosystem is incredibly important. And it starts to allow you to upskill your employees. It keeps them ahead of the business, which is 100% the goal of a talent strategy, is keep the skill sets bigger than the business. And it creates that environment of continuous growth and learning. And when you look at, some of our individuals who have entered the workforce, are entering or have entered the workforce in the last 5 to 6 years, one of their most important values is growing and learning. And so if you're not providing them the opportunity to grow and learn and try new things and just experiment with some things, they're going to go somewhere else that does. And when you think about the long-term success of a company, you have to have people at every step of their career, every single age group. You have to have all those people to make sure that that company has a great succession plan. And we have to hold people accountable in good ways. When they're doing great, you have to be able to say, hey, this is why you're doing great. This is what is great. And you have to have a system where if someone's struggling, you're able to know that specifically why. People always jump to these yearly reviews. There's mixed feelings on them, right or wrong, that doesn't matter. What matters is whatever your ecosystem, your culture, your org design, whatever that needs, you have to find a way to hold people accountable in that. It is an exchange when we go to work. This is not volunteer. I'm very direct on that. People think, oh, well, I, did my best, and that's amazing, but we still have to meet the job expectations. Without a way to hold people accountable or to tell people what you expect out of them, that makes it very hard to have a high functioning team. And I always think it's interesting. I'll talk to someone about someone not meeting expectations. So I'm like, where in their job description is that? Well, I told them. Okay, where is this? Well, and I'm like, so the problem is they are not able to meet your secret expectations. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, let's take those secret expectations and make them known expectations, give them a chance and see what happens. But it is interesting how often leaders have secret expectations of their team. But in a great performance management world, we don't have secrets. People know what they do. And it drives, again, that accountability, that continuous learning, and it creates an environment where high performers want to be. Your high performers do not want to be around a bunch of people who aren't doing their job. If they're highly accountable, they're going to expect everyone around them is highly accountable. So Trevor, absolutely, your people have to know where the goal line is. Yeah. And you have to celebrate it when they get there. You can't keep moving it. That's the other thing. Someone will say, well, this, and I'm like, well, you've moved it like 4 times. That's okay. But did you celebrate when they hit it? And then did you, again, have clarity on what's next? Or was that another secret? And so we have to have that performance. And then we have to succession plan. And we've already talked a little bit about that. Again, if you've got this massive talent strategy, you know where you're going to be in 5 years. Say you're going to triple your revenue in 5 years, and you have a marketing manager, and you're going to need a marketing director. You have to think about that from a succession plan. Does this person have the capabilities? If they do, let's invest the heck out of them to make sure they're ready in 5 years. If we don't think that, then we have to start thinking about what that job looks like, who might be in that job, whether that's external or someone from a different department. There's lots of ways to look at it. But really strong talent strategies not only help people today, but it's thinking about that 3, 5, even 10 years down the road. Because you have to, again, make sure that whatever you're working on within your organization, it's pulling your people towards your business objectives. And that can be, again, through your executive alignment. Someone can have this COO title, but if you're a COO of a $200 million business, if you're a COO now of $1 billion business, your job description might look exactly the same, but I can guarantee you the job is very different. And so that's why that succession planning is so important, and being able to see all of that. And all the reasons why it matters. And so those are some of the pieces that we think about in a strong talent strategy. You can think about your team today. There's a one-pager that's been dropped in the chat. If you don't see it, let us know. Jim can add it back in. But what I'd love for you to do is, we can talk about it now, and I can answer questions here in a few minutes. But, look at all of these pieces and think about your organization on a scale of 1 to 5. Give yourself a score. And then start to take notes about what you're doing well, what are you missing? And this will help you start to get organized and thinking about a talent strategy. Because again, your best leaders have their money organized and well planned, and their talent well organized and well planned. Because if you have a strong system around your people and your money, you can do anything you want to do. It makes a huge difference. And then people are always saying, well, how do you measure success? All this is woo-woo. How do you measure success? Well, there's all kinds of KPIs you can put in here, but here's how you measure success. Are you meeting your business objectives? If you are, that's fantastic. But if you do not have a strong handle on your money and your people, my guess is that you are really struggling to meet your company goals. Oh, look who showed up. Hi, it's good to see you. And again, I have the worksheet for you, and you can rate your company in these different pieces. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions, comments, thoughts. Just throw it out.
Hey, Jen.
Hi.
Hey, this is Doug. How does one measure where you are? How do you know whether things are as you would hope them to be? Are there surveys, or what do you normally recommend in terms of just getting a sense of where things are? And then how do you measure the progress?
So great question. So when you think about just today in our webinar, I always look at it as the pain scale. If you think about your culture, one being this, we're all over the place. Every day's a new day and everyone's not getting along and we're double working and we're reworking, up to that 5. That's fantastic. Like, we are honed in. I know every day how people are going to, not only what work they're going to do, but I know how they're going to do that work. That's a 5. And so I love looking at this in a simple way of the pain scale on all of those. Do we have succession plan? How well is our executives aligned? On a scale of 1 to 5, most executives can say very quickly how they rate that from a pain standpoint in that. Now, if we were doing actual discovery and we were getting into that, there's a lot of like pieces in that. But I mean, starting with the pain scale will help you get to know where you're at.
Got it. So that's some sort of a numeric sensibility.
Yes, and the worksheet that I dropped in the chat, yes, absolutely.
Got it.
And when you think about starting to measure, again, I always say business results are the only measurement we're looking for. But that's, we start to set those out, and every company's going to be different. How, well we make decisions, maybe setting how we work together. If you're going to do executive alignment, the beginning of that is how are we holding each other accountable? Who are we as a team? What are our KPIs? And so you start to set those measurables out. You get together once a quarter, you are measuring those every quarter, and you're able to start to track your progress in areas and start to see where areas get a little bumpy. Especially with the executive alignment, you'll be tracking and 3 or 4 areas are doing really well. And then all of a sudden, one quarter, one falls off. And there's always a reason why. It could be a lot of different things. It could be fear in the marketplace, economic change. You brought someone into the ecosystem, someone left the ecosystem. Different things happen. And so there's individual ways that we set those KPIs up for every company.
Got it. Sounds great.
Turnover is one of those. Again, I love performance. If you've got a great team, you're hitting your business results, and everything else gets very easy, and everyone gets very happy.
Happiness is good.
That's right. Everyone should wake up and love going to work. It should be fun. The challenges that your career gives you should be exciting and thrilling because you have the capability to figure it out. It shouldn't be a situation where you're so overwhelmed that you're in this fear-based mentality of nothing is possible or I can't do this. Helping people, mature their thinking to anything is possible, and thinking about how you lead with that mindset. It's a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, Trevor, if you could give one piece of advice to executives revisiting their talent strategy this year, what would it be? Great question, Trevor. I would start with executive alignment. Yes, culture is king, but if you have a strong group of executives who are at high functioning, it'll build its culture itself. I always love to start with culture, but the executives do create that. And so you can kind of work into it. If you only have one thing you can do this year, do that. Everything else will work into it.
When people, Jen, hey, by the way, I was going to try to move heaven and earth to be here today. I had a big meeting. We got it done early. I'm like, I've got to sit in and listen to Jen. She is so awesome.
Thank you
So
for coming.
I didn't catch your presentation, but I know that it's being it's in performance scoring, and I know they're recording it, so I'll catch up with it. But I've always and I think you and I've talked about the some of this stuff, but is somebody who's been a consultant in previous life and go in somewhere and they're like, we're changing our culture. I'm like, oh, really? Is everybody leaving or coming? Or like, how exactly are you changing your culture? I've
Yep.
always thought of like culture as a product of or a sum of a group of people. But from your and you're the expert, but if I were to say, well, culture is the sum of your people, what's your response to that?
I would say, yeah, it's the ecosystem those people have created. Culture is the ecosystem. You can have a healthy one, you can have an okay one, you can have one that's barely there, and you can have one that's imploding on itself. And it absolutely is the sum of everyone who is showing up every day. Every single conversation either adds to or takes away from how you want the work done. And you can throw it anything on a piece of paper. It doesn't matter what that is. It's really how those people start to function together. And it starts at the top. It starts with org design. And so if you have this culture that you're supposed to do work one way, but you have a really archaic, broken down system of how work gets done, then those aren't going to happen together. And you have to make sure that we're really focusing on those things. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We are an ecosystem today. We've created how we're interacting already today. Oh, you're on mute. See, we're already that ecosystem. You're on mute.
Most people would prefer it to be that way.
Never.
But Trevor's like, yeah, maybe. But Jen, so here I got a question for you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there a good leading question? Like, is there like a question that exposes culture that leaders can ask, or that you ask leaders that maybe kind of their answer just kind of like illuminates so much for you?
Oh my gosh, yes. How consistent is the work performed? And if they're like, man, some days we're on it and some days it's all over the place and some days I don't even know who's showing up, and I'm like, okay, the ecosystem's all off. So how consistent is the work done?
That you could, I don't know what the name of your presentation is because I'm not looking at it, but man, if you titled it that, I mean, what a great question.
How consistent? Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting when you think about consistency and how you build consistency and discipline. I use the word discipline a lot. So I might ask someone, how disciplined is your team? Because discipline is consistency. But companies who are highly disciplined, in other words, we know how we're going to do the work. We know what work we're going to do. We're going to be organized in how we do it. We're going to have processes, SOPs, however that is, but we're highly disciplined. It just cuts out the junk that makes the noise, that makes everyone, talk behind the back or kind of do this, but I should have done that. But discipline and consistency are always the key. Right.
Hey guys, look, I can ask all the questions, so this isn't, and I'm not paying her for consulting right now, but if anybody else has a question, otherwise I've got about 37 other ones.
Well, see, Trevor dropped one in, so we're gonna let Trevor have a turn because I'm excited how much Trevor has actually like engaged in talk. So Trevor, I know you were on it today, just because Trevor is a man of he's efficient in his communication style. In my experience, and what are the early warning signs that an organization doesn't have a solid talent strategy? Your top performer is pissed. There you go. When your top performer is like, what the heck is going on here? You better figure it out.
So that goes back to the mountain.
Yeah.
And climbing up there and getting to the top and saying, what now? You don't have anything for them.
Absolutely. Yep. And they go off the cliff. They're like, see ya, I'm out of here. And when your best people start to leave, when your best people are mad at you and frustrated and don't want to play your game anymore, you got a problem. Nima, how often do you review a session plan? It just depends on the organization and how fast it's moving. Every 6 months at least, because it takes 6 months to kind of see if the work you're putting in pays off. There are people who do it once a year. The world changes too fast for that. A lot of companies, we divide succession planning into categories. So there's that long-term group that we may be investing in over 2 years because we see potential. We may visit them every 6 months, but then there might be another group who we know we're going to promote in the next 12 months. So we may visit their performance and where they are with what we've asked them to do, how we're thinking about them. We may visit them every 3 months. And so don't look at a succession plan as everyone's in the same category. Divide them up based on your business needs, based on your talent strategy and what you've laid out for their development. Let's see, John, do you work with internal training development HRs to help support and align? Yeah, absolutely. I would say probably 90% of the companies I work with have an internal HR department. For a couple of reasons why they call me in. One is maybe it's a fast growing company and they're so busy doing the HR stuff, they don't have time to get to the HR strategy. Sometimes it is a fast growing startup, so they haven't put HR in yet, but they've got to figure that out. So they're smart enough to start with a talent strategy and then think of the HR stuff. When I think of HR, I think about employee relations. We got, two people are fighting over something. I'm thinking about payroll, compensation, benefits, the stuff I don't do. Recruiting, FYI, I don't do any of that. You don't want me to either. I am the strategy person. A lot of companies can't bring in a chief people officer. So this is the stuff a chief people officer would do. And so we do that. Companies who have chief people officers, they maybe just don't have that skill set. They don't have vice presidents yet. They have managers. So there's 1,000 different reasons, but I would say 90% of the time there is some sort of an HR department. I typically work closely with the executives and then partner with HR is typically how it works. So great question, John. Anything else? Anyone have like a company or a story or about their own company or a place they worked where you were like, man, now I see why they were able to do what they did because they had some of this figured out. I always love good stories too, but maybe we don't have any. I hope someone does.
I got tons of stories. So I definitely want to connect offline here. We align so much we've done, and I've actually gone from that, what I was doing, similar to you did now, to a completely different thing with the mental performance based on the same principles. But I still remember one of my projects that aligned, you probably would have done the same thing, was at Abbott Labs back in the day when they had all these different divisions, and they had a rule that you could go from division to division to division, and because each division was independent, because they didn't want the whole company to get shut down if something went wrong. Yeah. People would show up and they had no idea what they were supposed to do. Projects were failing. Yep. So just built out. This is back in the days of notes, right? Lotus Notes, probably before your time, but basically we created all the project templates and all the processes, whatever, and exactly what you're talking about. They could move from division to division, and within days they could be productive.
In days they could be productive because there was discipline. Right. And there was strategy of what work we're doing, how we're doing the work, how that work intersects. And that's the biggest thing. Like so many people like they're just, I'm like, stop throwing money and payroll at your problems. Like we could do this with half the people and less than half the headaches.
Yeah, right.
Especially in today's world, it's interesting in today's org design, you can really look at things so differently because you can look at fractional, you can look at offshore, you can look at contract, you can we used to have to live with single points of failure because you could only afford to hire one person. If there's a single point of failure in an org design, I'm like, no, we're hiring an agency to do that because there's a couple of people over there that can fix it if it blows up. And so you have to get really creative. I have a client and their goal is to see how big they can get with 49 or less employees.
Wow.
Because once you
Wow.
hit 50 employees in the United States, it changes everything. There's so much more rigor. There's so much more compliance. There's so much, like, there's so much more. They already provide the benefits as if they have 50 or more, but they don't want to do all the rigor around compliance. And so it's made us get really creative, and it's been interesting because we have like a lot of the executives were, I sat on the executive team as a fractional chief people officer.
Cool. Yeah.
So I'm going to drop my LinkedIn. So connect with me, John.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
Michael, I'd love to connect with you too. So what advice would I give to a company transition to move from automated roles as that affects work culture and org design? Ooh, start with a white piece of paper. Org design should always be a white piece of paper. And think about, like, all the work is in a bucket, like a bunch of Legos. And you throw those Legos down and you just start organizing them. If you walk into org design in that situation, Michael, and you're trying to think with what we have, you'll never be able to think about what could we have. And so white piece of paper, throw the work on and start just playing like it's pieces of a puzzle, and then you figure it all out. Great question.
By the way, I love your books behind you, all the artist books.
One of
Too, right?
my worst habits is I buy a lot of books. I collect books. I collect different types of books, different book publishers. Yeah. Most women walk in with too many like shopping bags. Well, I do that,
Right.
but mine are all books. And
It's
I
always great
actually
until you have to move, right?
Exactly. And it is not uncommon that when I come home from a vacation, especially if I've been traveling outside the country, that I have a new suitcase that is full of books. The most I've ever brought home from one vacation was 22 books.
Wow. Wow.
It's crazy. I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah. I understand it. You would get along great with my daughter who just graduated college. And she took out more books in our town library outside of Chicago than anyone else the entire year. So loves to read, just like you. That's great.
I love to read. I love books. I am very active in the world of the freedom of reading and trying to protect our freedom to read what is important to us.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Yes. And voter registration. If anyone knows me, that's the two things I'm always doing. Voter registration, the freedom of reading, outside of this job that actually pays the bills. It allows me to buy books.
Right. That's great. That's great.
All right, we're coming up to the end, but I wanted to say thank you to everyone. If you have any questions, connect with me on LinkedIn.
Thanks,
I dropped it
Jen.
in there. You guys are the best. Thank you, Global Chamber, for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Jen. I guess this is my role to say officially goodbye. I was very nervous about this moment. Just kidding. Great job today, and I would encourage anybody who's still on the chat, look at Jen's LinkedIn profile. She posts great stuff, really insightful articles and thoughts on those articles. Really get your mind into the space she's been talking about today. So I'd highly recommend you following her on LinkedIn. With that, though, we're almost to the top of the hour, and I know I've got something else to get to. I'm sure y'all do as well. So happy Tuesday. Have a great one.
Be in touch.
See y'all next time.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.